I never thought I'd be the kind of person posting a story like this, but I can't get it out of my head. Maybe writing it down will make sense of everything that happened, or maybe I just need someone out there to tell me I wasn't wrong. My name doesn't really matter, but I'm 23, and up until last year I lived with my grandmother, Ruth. She's the only family I have left. My mom passed when I was 13 from heart complications, and my dad, well, he disappeared long before that. Ruth, who was already retired from nursing, didn't even hesitate. She packed her small apartment in 2 days and moved across the state to raise me. She was the kind of woman who'd make soup for the neighbor before they asked and send handwritten birthday cards even to people who never replied. Her house smelled like cinnamon and old books. I can still hear her humming while folding laundry. Growing up with her wasn't perfect. She had that stubborn generation before mine way of thinking, saving every grocery bag, unplugging appliances to cut the bill, refusing to buy anything online because the internet steals your soul. I used to laugh, but looking back, I wish I'd taken that last one more seriously. When I turned 18, I started community college for art and design. Ruth was proud. She used to tape my sketches to the fridge like I was still in elementary school. We didn't have much money, but she insisted on giving me part of her pension every month. "Education's an investment," she'd say. I'd joke, "In what, emotional debt?" She'd smile and tap her chest. "In you." Then, about a year ago, everything fell apart in a way that felt almost cinematic, except it wasn't fiction. It was my life collapsing in slow motion. It started with her phone ringing constantly, unknown numbers. Sometimes she'd hang up looking worried. When I asked, she brushed it off. "Just those people about taxes, dear. Probably a mix-up." I didn't push. She'd handled her own finances for decades, and I didn't want to sound patronizing. I was busy with finals and an internship at a small design studio, trying to prove I could juggle adulthood without being a burden. One Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen and found her crying quietly over a cup of tea. She never cried, not even when she broke her hip 2 years before. She was shaking so hard the teaspoon clattered. "They're saying I owe the government," she whispered. $7,200, and they said if I don't pay today, the police will come. I froze. Every instinct screamed it was a scam, but she showed me the email. It had the IRS logo, official language, even her social security number in it. "Grandma, this looks fake," I said, but she panicked. "They knew my information. How could it be fake?" She'd already clicked the link. By the time I checked her bank app, half her savings were gone. Years of careful planning, all vanished in minutes. I remember my throat tightening, that cold rush of disbelief that comes right before your brain starts screaming, "Do something." I called the bank, the fraud department, anyone, but they said the transaction had already cleared to an account overseas. I'll never forget the look on her face, more shame than fear. "I just wanted to make it right," she whispered. I told her it wasn't her fault, but she wouldn't listen. The next few weeks were a blur of forms, calls, and apologies. The bank refunded a small portion, but most of it was gone forever. With her fixed income, we couldn't keep up with the mortgage. I started picking up extra shifts at the campus cafe, but it wasn't enough. One day, she sat me down, her hands trembling, and said, "Sweetheart, maybe it's time I move somewhere smaller. Somewhere with help." That word, help, stabbed deeper than any insult. I knew she meant a nursing home. I tried to fight it. I told her we'd manage, that I'd quit school for a while, find more work, but her health started declining fast. The stress, the guilt, it broke her in ways the hip fracture never could. She'd forget things, lose track of the day, ask me if mom was coming for dinner. The doctor called it cognitive stress reaction, but I knew it was heartbreak. In the end, I agreed to what she wanted. We found a modest assisted living home called Meadowview Haven. The staff was kind, but the moment we left her there, something in me cracked. That house we'd shared for 10 years felt like a grave when I returned alone. For weeks, I tried to move on. School, work, repeat. But every time I saw her empty chair, anger bubbled up again. Anger at the faceless person who'd stolen everything she'd built. That person didn't just take her money. They took her pride, her independence, her mind. One night, scrolling aimlessly through Reddit, I found a thread on scams targeting the elderly. Hundreds of people wrote about their parents and grandparents losing life savings to fake IRS calls. That's when a thought struck me. These scammers aren't ghosts. They're real people. They leave traces. I decided I wasn't going to sit around waiting for justice that might never come. If the police couldn't catch whoever did this, maybe I could. I didn't know where to start, but I had anger, caffeine, and the internet, and sometimes that's enough to start a revolution, or at least a very reckless mission. I dove in like someone possessed. If you asked me then whether I thought I could actually catch whoever stole my grandma's savings, I would have lied and said yes, because admitting doubt felt like giving up. I started with the things most people ignore: footprints online, scam operators leave patterns, sloppy little breadcrumbs, because they're busy counting the next cash out instead of covering their tracks. I made a throwaway email and a fake Facebook for an old man named Harold. Green, picture book retired, gardening photos, a couple of cute grandkid selfies stolen from a stock site, the whole sad, adorable combo. I wrote long posts about being nervous with technology, about wanting to invest a small inheritance to help my granddaughter finish school. I even posted a photo of an envelope labeled pension to look real. I know it sounds sick, but it felt like bait in an unfair game. It didn't take long. A week after Harold's profile went live, a man named David Kemp sent a friend request. He messaged with the kind of civility that smells like practice: polite openings, just the right level of personal detail, never too much. He mentioned his consulting practice and a special program for retirees. He used words like guaranteed and exclusive in the same sentence. My stomach dropped the first time he asked Harold to meet in person. That was bold. That was also the exact mistake every con artist makes: becoming human enough to feel safe. I made other profiles too. Martha, an active volunteer who was just looking to diversify her small fund, and Raymond, a widower with a fake Chrysler in his background photo. David fell for each one in the same week. He asked the same questions, sent the same documents, and used a business address that led to a cheap mailbox rental in a strip mall. I took screenshots, archived emails, and saved transaction confirmations where the money flowed into accounts with names that sounded like they were pulled from a bingo cage. The adrenaline was intoxicating. It felt like sleuthing in a cheap detective novel, but the stakes were very real. While I built the evidence, I also reached out to other victims. I posted anonymously on neighborhood forums and private groups, explained I was compiling a list of people scammed by the same consultant. 2 women responded within a day: Lena, who lost her late husband's life insurance payout, and Marco, who'd sent his severance check after being convinced he'd double it. They were scared, embarrassed, furious, the whole ugly cocktail. We started a tiny, secret support chat. Sharing those stories made me less alone in the rage. It also made our operation stronger. We decided to act together. Alone, a single complaint is a paper in a drawer. Together, with records, timestamps, and matching methods, we could at least get the detective's attention. We planned carefully. Elena, the tech-savvy one, would record conversations and back them up to 3 different drives. Marco would map the business address and note times David arrived and left. Lena would pose as a potential large investor and request a meeting. I would play the wild card, someone young enough to be dismissed, someone who could move quickly and not draw suspicion. Our first meetup felt like the opening scene of a heist movie, except it was terrifying and very real. I sat across the street from a greasy spoon, heart pounding, notebook pretending to be homework. David wore a navy jacket and a practiced smile. His eyes flicked around like someone expecting to be watched. When Lena went in alone, I thought my chest would cave in from worry. But the plan worked, until it didn't. David was smooth at first, offering vague pitches, showing glossy brochures that were convincing if you didn't know the jargon. He kept steering the conversation to cash transactions and immediate transfers to secure the deal. Classic red flags. things escalated fast when we tried to record him. He left the table to take a private call, and by the time Lena pretended to fumble with her purse to grab her phone, he was already suspicious. He asked her why she was nervous and hinted that she should be careful who she trusted. In a blink, he moved like a predator protecting prey, quick, aggressive, a hand near her bag. I lost my cool. I stormed in from outside, heart in my throat, and shouted that he was a fraud. I didn't plan for the surge of adrenaline or the way his expression changed from smug to dangerous in an instant. We didn't get the smoking gun audio that day. What we got instead was a raw slap of reality. These cons are practiced people with backup lies and a million tiny ways to cover tracks. We left with bruised nerves and a recording that had more stammering than confession. The police took our report, but the detective's face told the truth we all felt. This kind of case requires layers, multiple victims, paper trails, a glaring mistake from the con man. We had some pieces, but not the kind prosecutors drool over. Still, there was momentum. We kept digging. I spent nights cross-referencing phone numbers, tracing IP addresses where I could, and persuading terrified victims to share statements. Sometimes I felt like an internet archaeologist, piecing together a skeleton from shards. Other times, I felt like I was walking along a cliff edge with no rope. My grades slipped. My internship supervisor asked if I was okay. I lied and said family stuff. It felt hypocritical. Protecting my grandma had become an obsession that was eating the parts of my life that might have saved us. But if giving up meant accepting that ruthless stranger stole Ruth's future and my scholarship money, I didn't know how to breathe. The group evolved into something more than a conspiracy ring. It became a lifeline. We'd meet at coffee shops and quietly compare notes. Tiny victories, like a bank flagging a suspicious transfer, felt like winning a war. When one of our members finally forced a payment reversal, we cheered like kids. At the same time, I watched Ruth fade in her room at Meadowview. Some afternoons she seemed lucid, thankful for the visits, smiling when I showed her my latest sketch. Other times, she'd stare out the window, a look of someone trying to remember how to be herself. Every small win we had in our investigations felt like a small scratch on the enormous bruise. The con man left behind. I need to be honest. Part of why I kept pushing was anger. Not just the righteous kind, but the ugly, corrosive kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m., plotting. I wanted David Kemp to look over his shoulder. I wanted him to lose sleep the way we did. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd done to a person who'd spent a lifetime caring for others. But beneath the rage, there was grief. Real, daily grief for the future stolen from Ruth, and for the scholarship fund that would have let me finish school without working 3 jobs. Every time I watched a tutorial on how to set up burner accounts or mask an IP, I knew I was crossing lines I'd never thought I'd cross. Yet I also felt a fierce, salvational truth. Sometimes the people the system leaves behind must make noise loud enough to force the system to wake up. So we tightened the net. We coordinated with a legal clinic at the college. Students there offered to file a consolidated complaint. We documented patterns, printed timelines, highlighted the chain of transfers. It felt small and massive at once, like scribbling a plan on the back of a napkin that could change everything. And right when I thought we might actually make progress, something happened that threw everything into chaos. David moved his operation overnight. The mailbox closed, the website went dark. It was the classic vanish. I remember the hollow feeling, like the rug of hope had been pulled faster than I could stand. Now, before I go on, because if you've stuck with me this far, thank you. I need to ask something that matters more than anything. What would you do in my shoes? Have you ever tried to confront a scammer? Do you think I was reckless or brave? I want to hear your opinion. Please drop a comment and tell me how you'd handle it. After the disappearance, it felt like we'd been punched mid-sentence. No closure, no justice, just silence. I'd stare at my grandmother's old phone sometimes, scrolling through spam messages as if one of them might whisper the truth. But scammers don't leave explanations, they leave ghosts. Still, I couldn't accept it, so I started checking the data we'd already gathered. Timestamps, bank transfers, even metadata from the fake investment forms. That's when I noticed something small but sharp. Every client document David sent had been edited on the same computer, and the username hidden in the file properties wasn't David Kemp. It was E. Ramos. It felt like the first breath after drowning. I spent the night digging, cross-referencing business licenses, property records, anything public. At 3 a.m., I found an Evan Ramos Financial Consulting, registered in the next county. The address led to a shabby office complex that looked like it hadn't seen paint since the 1990s. The phone number matched the prefix from some of David's calls. My pulse hammered in my ears. This wasn't proof, but it was something, a new trail. I told the group the next morning. Lena wanted to go straight to the police again, but I'd already tried that road. I needed solid evidence, proof that Evan Ramos and David Kemp were the same person. Marco suggested we plant a digital bait, like a honeypot email offering a huge fake investment. If he bit, we'd get his IP and tie it to the new office. It was crazy, borderline illegal, but desperation makes strange things sound reasonable. I hesitated only a second before agreeing. We spent 2 nights crafting the perfect message. It came from a fictional retiree named Walter Grant, who supposedly had $200,000 to invest after selling a small farm. We filled it with all the classic phrases these scammers drool over. Urgent opportunity, no heirs, trust-based deal. We attached a fake PDF contract that pinged a server we controlled. If anyone opened it, we'd know the location. 2 days later, it pinged. The signal came from the same building as the Evan Ramos Financial Consulting office. That was it. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped my laptop. We had linked the alias to a physical place. For a second, I felt triumphant, like justice had finally cracked open, but fear followed right after. What now? March into his office like some vigilante? Hand the data to detectives who might bury it under red tape? Neither option felt safe, yet doing nothing felt impossible. That weekend, I drove out there. The building was uglier in person, half empty, a flickering for lease sign out front. His suite number was 206. I sat in my car for almost an hour, heart racing, watching people come and go. Around noon, a man in a gray jacket stepped out carrying a briefcase and a cup of coffee. I recognized the posture immediately, the same confident shuffle I'd seen at the diner months earlier. Different haircut, same shark eyes. Evan Ramos was David Kemp. I filmed him discreetly from the car, zoomed in on his license plate, and texted the video to Lena. "Got him," I wrote. She replied with nothing but a string of exclamation marks. It should have felt satisfying, but instead, my stomach twisted. Watching him walk casually to his car, talking on the phone, laughing, like he hadn't destroyed lives, made my blood boil. My grandma was spending her afternoon staring at a beige wall while this man joked about weekend plans. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, small and tired, framed by the soft light of the nursing home. "You look pale, honey," she'd said the last time I visited. "Promise me you're not worrying about old mistakes." Old mistakes. She still thought losing everything was her fault. That sentence broke something in me. Around 3 in the morning, I grabbed my notebook and wrote one line over and over. "He doesn't get to walk away." The next morning, I told the group my plan. We'd gather all the proof, recordings, screenshots, metadata, and drop it directly in the hands of a local journalist who covered consumer fraud. Marco thought it was dangerous. Lena said the paper might ignore us. But Helene, the oldest in the group, nodded firmly. "Public shame works faster than police sometimes," she said. She was right. I reached out to a reporter named Mia Porter, who had written about elder scams before. I sent a brief, careful email summarizing the evidence and asked for a meeting. She replied within hours. "Bring everything," she wrote. "If it checks out, we'll run it." The following Friday, I walked into her cluttered newsroom with a flash drive shaking in my hand. Mia listened while I told the whole story, from my grandmother's first email to the fake profiles to finding the alias. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back, exhaled, and said, You've done half my job already. That night, she called to say she'd verified parts of our data. 2 days later, a draft article landed in my inbox titled, Retirees Trapped in Elaborate Scam Linked to Local Financial Consultant. Seeing those words was surreal. My fingers hovered over the screen. Justice wasn't complete, but it was moving. The article published online the next week. Within 24 hours, it had thousands of shares. The comments were a mix of outrage and heartbreak, people recognizing the same scam tactics, promising to check on their parents and grandparents. It felt like a storm finally breaking after months of suffocating air. 3 days later, the police reopened the investigation. Someone higher up must have felt the public pressure. They raided the office at Suite 206 and confiscated computers. We weren't allowed to know details, but the detective who once looked bored now called me Ms. Grant and thanked me for the initial groundwork. For the first time, I let myself breathe. But relief doesn't erase damage. Ruth was too far gone to understand what had happened. When I told her they were investigating the man who took her money, she smiled faintly and said, "That's nice, dear." She didn't recognize the war behind those words. She didn't know that her loss had ignited a small army of strangers who refused to stay silent. I thought that would be the end, but stories don't always fade where you expect them to. Because a week later, I received an email from him. It was short. "You don't know what you've started. Some things should stay buried." My chest went cold. He'd found me. I must have read that email 20 times before I could breathe properly. The sender's address looked new, but the writing style, the casual arrogance, the clipped sentences, was unmistakable. It was him. For a long minute, I just stared at the screen, hands shaking, cursor blinking over the words like a silent heartbeat. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend it never came. But another part, the one that had carried me this far, whispered that maybe this was a chance. His mistake, his arrogance showing again. I forwarded the message to Mia, the journalist. She called almost immediately. "You realize this could qualify as intimidation?" she said, her voice firm but cautious. "You should file a report right now." I hesitated. I'd already dragged enough chaos into my life. But she was right. I went to the police the next morning with the printout. The officer took notes, asked if I'd received any threats before, and told me not to reply to the message. He said they'd add it to the file. The words sounded small, bureaucratic, like something that gets filed and forgotten. Still, the email changed everything. For weeks I couldn't focus on school or sleep properly. Every knock at the door made me jump. I started carrying pepper spray and checking my mirrors on the drive home. It was paranoia, maybe, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I even caught myself flinching when my phone buzzed. My therapist later called it post-traumatic vigilance. To me, it just felt like surviving. Then something strange happened. The fear began to morph into resolve. I kept thinking about Ruth sitting quietly at Meadowview, asking me why I looked tired, and I realized that being afraid of him was just another way of letting him win. So I made a new decision. I wouldn't hide. I'd speak louder. Mia's article was still circulating, and the comment section had exploded. Families of other victims reached out. One woman said her mother had wired $10,000 to the same fake investment firm. Another described the same accent, same vocabulary. We were connecting dots faster than any investigator could. It was like lighting 1,000 small candles against one man's darkness. Mia decided to write a follow-up piece focusing on the survivors' stories. She asked if I would go on record this time with my real name. That terrified me, but I said yes. If he was watching, then he'd know I wasn't backing down. The interview went live on a Friday evening. I remember sitting in my car outside the nursing home, refreshing the page over and over. There was my face, tired but determined, next to the headline, "Granddaughter Turns Tables on Scammer Who Ruined Her Family." That night, messages poured in. People offered support, legal advice, even donations to help Ruth. For the first time in months, I cried not from anger, but from relief. I showed Ruth the photo on my phone, and though I doubt she fully understood, she smiled and whispered, "That's my brave girl." I think I'll carry that sentence for the rest of my life. The next morning, I woke up to another email, from a stranger this time. The subject line read, "He's trying again." Inside was a screenshot of a message the stranger had received from a David Kemp Financial Services. Same pitch, same language, dated 3 days earlier. He hadn't stopped. Even after exposure after the police raid, he was still out there, adapting, shifting names like snakes shed skin. For a moment, I felt the old fury return, but this time it wasn't wild or reckless. It was focused. I sent everything to Mia again. She looped in an investigative producer from a local TV station who wanted to turn the story into a segment. They interviewed victims, cybersecurity experts, and even a retired FBI agent who called it one of the most organized small-scale fraud networks he'd seen. Hearing that on television was surreal. The man who'd made me feel powerless was now being described as a case study in greed and deception. But exposure doesn't erase fear. 2 days after the broadcast, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street from my apartment. It stayed there all afternoon. At one point, I swear I saw a man inside scrolling on his phone. I didn't get a clear look, but it was enough to make my pulse spike. I called the police again. They sent a patrol car, but by the time it arrived, the sedan was gone. The officer said it could have been a coincidence. Maybe it was. But the dread lingered. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a printed photo of me outside Meadowview, pushing my grandma's wheelchair. Written in red marker across the bottom, "Stay out of other people's business." I won't lie, I nearly threw up. I called Mia and the police, shaking, explaining everything. They took the photo for fingerprinting, but again, nothing immediate came of it. I stayed at a friend's place for a while after that, always double-locking the door, keeping the curtains drawn. Fear and exhaustion blurred together until I couldn't tell one from the other. But then something unexpected happened. The fear became fuel. The people who'd reached out online started organizing. Someone created a private group called Fight the Fraud. Victims shared updates, tips, and emotional support. Some even managed to trace refund trails and reverse small payments. A retired IT worker offered to help secure accounts for elderly members. It grew into a small digital movement. I watched it bloom and realized that even if he wanted to scare me silent, the opposite had happened. The noise had multiplied. By midsummer, authorities finally announced formal charges against Evan Ramos, aka David Kemp, and 2 unnamed accomplices. The press release was brief but clear. Evidence seized from the office linked him to over 50 fraudulent transfers across 4 states. I cried so hard I had to pull over on the highway. It wasn't total justice. Most victims would never see their money again. But it was something real. When I told Ruth, she blinked at me, confused, then smiled like she understood anyway. "Told you the truth always comes out," she said softly. For once, I believed her. That night, I sat by her bed, sketchbook in my lap, drawing her hands, thin, trembling, still, graceful. I realized that what we'd done wasn't just revenge, it was restoration. We had taken something invisible and ugly and dragged it into the light. And though I was terrified every step of the way, I knew I'd do it again if it meant no one else's grandmother would fall for the same lie. But I also knew something else. This story wasn't finished yet, because the deeper I looked into the case, the more it seemed he hadn't acted alone. The emails, the bank trails, they hinted at a larger network. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to go down that rabbit hole again. I tried telling myself it was over, that justice had done its job, that Ruth could spend her last years in peace, that I could finally go back to being a normal 20-something worrying about rent and deadlines. But the truth doesn't shut off just because you wish it to. Once you see how easily people can be broken by deception, it's hard to look away. A month after the arrest, I got a call from Mia. She sounded different, excited, but cautious. "The story's bigger," she said. "Federal investigators believe the scam wasn't just local. The data from his laptop connects to overseas accounts, possibly part of a larger laundering network. My stomach sank. I thought catching him meant closure, but now it just felt like opening another door in a hallway of endless doors. That night, I visited Ruth again. She was dozing when I came in, sunlight pooling through the blinds, dust dancing in the quiet air. I sat beside her and told her everything, not because she could help, but because she deserved to hear how much she'd mattered. I told her how strangers had donated money for her care, how people online called her the grandmother who inspired justice. Her eyes fluttered open, soft and unfocused. "You're still fighting, aren't you?" she murmured. "I guess so," I said. She smiled faintly. "That's what you get from me, stubbornness." When she fell asleep again, I just sat there listening to the faint rhythm of her breathing and realized that what I'd been chasing wasn't revenge. It was agency. When someone takes everything from you, even one act of resistance feels like rebuilding the world from scratch. Over the next few weeks, Mia's new investigation gained traction. National outlets picked up the story. Suddenly, I was doing interviews, podcasts, even a morning show. People kept calling me brave, but bravery wasn't what I felt. I felt exposed, hollowed out, constantly one headline away from collapsing. But I couldn't stop, because every time another victim emailed me, thanking me for speaking out, I felt that same surge of protective fury that started it all. One evening after an interview, I found an old sketchbook I hadn't opened since before the scam. Inside were drawings of places Ruth and I used to go: the farmer's market, the pier, the living room window with her reading chair. Each page smelled faintly of graphite and dust. Looking at them, I started crying, not out of sadness, but because I finally saw the quiet life we'd lost. Not to death, but to greed. It hit me that for months I'd defined myself by anger, by him. I wanted to be something more than a cautionary tale. So I started painting again, using art to process everything. I painted Ruth's hands reaching for sunlight. I painted shattered coins turning into birds. I painted a house with no doors but open windows. I shared them online, and to my surprise, people responded. Victims wrote that the art helped them feel seen, that the images expressed what words couldn't. One woman said she hung my painting in her mother's room at the nursing home. That message meant more to me than any headline. But peace doesn't come easy when you've lived months on adrenaline. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, sure I heard my email alert, or catch my reflection and think someone was watching. Therapy helped, but healing isn't linear. I still flinch when someone mentions taxes. I still triple-check URLs before clicking. But maybe that vigilance is part of what I'll carry forward, a scar that warns others. A few months later, the trial began. I sat in the courtroom behind the victim's row, hands clenched, heart pounding. He looked smaller in person than I remembered, shorter, tired, clean-shaven, wearing an ill-fitting suit. When the prosecutor listed the charges, wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, I felt a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who'd spent his life mistaking manipulation for power. And maybe that was worse. When the verdict came, guilty on multiple counts, the room erupted in murmurs. I didn't cry. I just exhaled for what felt like the first time in a year. The sentence wasn't long enough for what he'd done, but it was enough to stop him. Enough to make a headline that ended differently from most stories like ours. Afterward, Mia hugged me outside the courthouse. "You realize you changed things," she said. "You gave people a face for this fight." I didn't feel like a hero, but I finally understood what she meant. Sometimes courage doesn't roar, it just refuses to vanish. I went to visit Ruth that night with a small cupcake because it was her 86th birthday. She was asleep when I arrived, so I just sat there, holding her hand, whispering that it was over, that we'd made it. A few weeks later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. The nurses said she was smiling. I like to believe she knew. Now it's been 6 months. The story's old news, buried under fresher tragedies. But strangers still message me sometimes to say they recognized a scam because of that video, or that they convinced their parents to hang up on a fake IRS call. Every time, I feel a tiny piece of Ruth living on through that caution. I sometimes reread the last text she ever sent me. Don't let the world harden you, darling. Even stones can bloom if you water them enough. I didn't understand it then, but now I do. Anger may have started this journey, but love, the quiet kind that refuses to die, is what finished it. So here I am, sharing it again, this time as a full circle. If you're watching or reading this, I want you to know that justice isn't just something handed down in courtrooms. It's something we build together, story by story, truth by truth. If someone you love has ever been taken advantage of, speak up. If you've been hurt, don't hide in shame. And if you think people like me are foolish for fighting back, maybe you're right, but I'd rather be foolish than silent. What do you think? Was I right to chase it this far? Would you have stopped earlier or done something different? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know.